Hello and welcome to another edition of our technique feature. Today we're in the wonderful woods of Wind Hill and we're here to talk about an issue that we refer to a lot. Probably accounts for quite a lot of the expense of our bike, but something too many of us don't really put too much thought into and certainly don't get the most out of. Now, of course, talking not about the whole bike itself, but about the suspension system that makes up a very important set of elements of the bike and can dramatically change the way your bike feels, rides, your performance and your overall enjoyment of the ride. I could encapsulate my divine wisdom about suspension and all its intricacies and how to set it up into a session of about 3.5 seconds. So rather than you listen to me whiffle on without any knowledge or very limited knowledge, apart from maybe it doesn't feel quite right today, we're going to talk to Greg Marshall here from TF Tuned. They're the UK's leading independent specialist on suspension. This man's got more knowledge about forks and shocks than most of us have got about our entire knowledge of mountain biking. So we're going to cover a few basics to start with, just to fill you in. Some of you it's not maybe new to you, some of it might be new to you. But looking at how we can get more bang for our buck and less buck from our bounce. First off, obviously forks, shocks. Let's start up the front end with forks.
Sure.
Most forks, I believe now, obviously operate around a similar platform. We've gone away from a coil-based system to an air-based system.
Yep.
Can you give us a quick overview of the whys and wherefores of your standard shock, your standard fork, and what sort of thing buyers should be looking for in terms of how it performs and what sort of adjustments we can make at the very basic level, and what things perhaps I should focus on is if I am making some tweaks for my ride, what am I looking to set up, how am I looking at it to feel, and what changes can I make?
For sure. So I think probably start off with the first kind of comment that you had there, which is what the manufacturers have now moved to, which is fundamentally air platform forks rather than a coil. So rather than using a physical coil spring in the spring side of the fork, we have kind of an air chamber which you're literally compressing to give you the kind of spring or what holds your body weight up. Reason this is so great is because, well, it's lighter for number one, so those magazine reviews for the weight of the fork and generally kind of the performance of it, like I say, bang for buck. That's one of the kind of reasons why they've done it. Another reason is it's infinitely adjustable. So if you're 7 stone, if you're 17 stone, to a point you can get a bike straight out of a box and kind of pump an air pressure in there that will be maybe not optimized for you, but at least work to kind of hold you up for most of your riding. So obviously the kind of main thing that we do with forks is talk about the air chamber, is kind of how you're riding, what you're riding, and probably the best way of setting it up for you, which isn't necessarily going to be the same for the person who developed the fork or a pro rider who might be a lot quicker, or someone who's just going around the woods and kind of doing a little leisurely lap with a mate of a Saturday morning.
So depending on what discipline I'm riding and depending on what level I'm riding, I guess setup becomes ever more important in terms of shaving off seconds or performance of fork.
Yeah, for sure. So some people just want that kind of magic carpet ride where it is just literally as comfortable as you can physically make the bike.
And what will that lose me in terms of, where will I lose that? That sounds great to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, if you have a fork set up for someone who wants it like really comfortable, magic carpet, not kind of having to necessarily worry about going so quickly, they just want to have fun and kind of, you know, generally just absorb the bumps and stuff, that's great. If you give it to then a pro rider or someone who's a bit more aggressive on the bike, you'll just be running through the travel, be far too slow in sections, it might be too quick in others. You might find that actually the kind of general setup for that person is, you know, it's basically the polar opposite of what we're talking about here. So
cool.
Yeah, it kind of it's personal preference to a point, but yeah, I think air is the way manufacturers have gone just because of the infinite adjustability.
Is it less maintenance with air than a coil?
No.
Okay. And let's go to that maintenance issue.
Sure.
What sort of service interval am I looking for on a fork like this? If I'm not doing anything myself, other than setting it up and riding it, keeping it clean, cleaning around the tops of the seals to make sure less dirt gets in there,
Yeah.
what sort of service interval am I looking at for a basic, and what would that involve?
Yeah.
And how often should I be looking at something a bit more of an overhaul?
Cool. So if I turn that question around, how do you clean your bike?
Very poorly and very infrequently.
With a jet wash?
No, I try and avoid a jet wash,
Okay.
so I'll use a hose and I'll use
some form of cleaning
Okay.
solution,
So-
potentially, but I usually apply it to the brush it on
Yeah.
rather than coat the whole
wicked.
bike.
Yeah, so that's obviously point one. Very, very well done. Jet wash, although it's real convenient, super bad for suspension. So we're kind of saying, with maintenance, if you say you're not doing any yourself, the honest answer is probably you should be. One of the things that people are really scared about suspension is actually how kind of everything's really expensive. You've got to be like an expert to take it apart, and to a point, you're absolutely right. Knowledge and kind of tuning things and actually going into the internals of your damping cartridge and your air assembly and all that kind of stuff is for the kind of home mechanic. Some people will be able to go further in than others, but it is probably best left to professionals. However, removing lower leg castings and cleaning out seals and kind of re-greasing, reapplying lubrication to the lowers and stuff is gonna, you need to be doing that in between service intervals. So, sorry,
Okay.
to go back to your question, service on the fork, depending on how often you ride it, we'd say yearly minimum. If you're riding all the time, you might want to ramp that up a bit.
That's for a full service.
That's for a full service, full strip down rebuild. Individual components will check shims, change the oil, check the bushings, change them if they need to be, or at least size them. But the thing is, with the kind of lower leg casting, is actually,
and this is the
Yeah,
just
this
as a
is-
novice. This is the lower leg, and I know that these are the seals, and they're
Yeah.
probably something that needs attention quite regularly, and
Yeah.
that's something I can do myself.
exactly. So all of the kind of intricate innards of the fork nowadays, for the most part, are housed in the upper unit. So this is the CSU crown steerer,
Okay.
which is the steerer tube, the crown, and then the two legs.
Yep.
Fit damper is isolated damper like a Charger that you see in a Pike as well. The float spring in your left-hand leg here, which is similar to Soloair from RockShox. They're all kind of housed in the upper unit of the fork, so the lowers can be removed, like literally in a bike stand. Just drop them off, clean them out, without actually going into the internals of the fork. So it's
Brilliant.
not quite as scary as you think it.
Because that is my fear would be I start taking these off and everything's just going to fall out and I'm going to be left with a pile of parts, and when I put it back together, a small jar of parts I've forgotten. But a fork's by no means a cheap part component of the bike, so looking after it and making some changes and doing some stuff myself sounds like a worthy investment of my time. Bearing in mind that they're all fairly similarly based around an air-based platform, and that lower leg doesn't, taking that off doesn't lead the bike to suddenly disintegrate, the fork to disintegrate. I'm a little bit more tempted to have a go at that myself, and maybe it's probably past the point of me doing it myself, and it's probably ready for service, but we could look at that. Now, we talked about the air volume. That does do the compression. I know a lot of riders, and I know I've seen a lot of people on a lot of demo days, and I've probably done it myself, who'll walk up to a bike. Yeah, that feels wicked. That feels great. My understanding is that it's not really just for catching you, it's much more for absorbing impact from below.
Yes.
And dealing with the inputs from the trail.
Yep.
How do I start to know? How do I start to tweak my fork to, what are the most obvious changes I can make to fork beyond the air and the compression rate? How quickly should it compress, and how much of this rubber band, where on my average ride, where should it end up?
Okay, so real simply, spring holds you up, which is your left-hand leg. Damper controls you and the fork. So you're talking about compression rate. It's not necessarily to do with the fork, obviously compresses, but the spring rate in there. Talk about putting pressure in there. It's measured in PSI or bar. And you can change kind of various little bits and bobs to do with the air chamber itself with kind of volume reducers to make the spring either more linear or more progressive, which is a great feature to have. Again, real simple to change the air volume in there just by putting kind of token system into the fork, plastic token to reduce it down, and they cause it to either ramp up at the end to give you more of a kind of progressive feel, or linear, which is more of a bottomless feel, i.e. it will blow through the travel. So, how heavy are you? Get it?
About
Roughly?
about 80 kilos, I
About
think.
80 kilos. So, I mean, we kind of, the manufacturer will give you a ballpark best kind of setup or an idea of PSI on a fork. So, I don't know, say for a 34, 65 PSI, say, or 70 PSI for the fork. You put that pressure in there and kind of set your damper roughly as it is. You're sitting on the bike, going to sag and shocks in a minute, but maybe you're running down a kind of a trail and finding that actually just rolling down something like you've done here. There's no real big features in here, probably biggest drops, maybe a foot if you're going at speed.
Shredding the nard.
Shredding the nard. Yet you're kind of making half travel. So this is travel indicator, obviously pretty simple way of actually showing you how much travel you're using throughout the course of a ride.
And you're suggesting if I roll off through that section and come down off that little step, I shouldn't be getting to that level of travel?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, again, depends on your ability. So if you're setting your fork up to be real nice and supple on your bike, and you're not a fan of doing loads of really big jumps and drops and taking big impacts, then, you know, stuff like this might be as kind of gnarly as you get. You always want a little bit kind of more left in the fork for when you get it just that little bit wrong. So if you're kind of doing jumps or drops or kind of anything, you want at the end of a ride to have maybe seen just shy of full travel if you haven't got something horribly wrong and landed too far off the end of a jump or landing or hit something, you know. So
I should be seeing a good range of movement there if I'm getting the shot, the air pressure right.
Yeah.
And like you said, I can change that size of the volume of the air that I can hold with a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of mechanics.
Yeah.
So keeping it off the peg, just adjusting that.
Just adjusting the
air is kind of the place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, some of you may have also heard of the other side of the suspension, which is the rebound. Some of you may have just heard the name, and that's about the size of it. So let's just think about a little bit about rebound. So can you just, very, in layman's terms, tell me a little bit about rebound? I know that some manufacturers use a tortoise and a hare, and some have a plus and a minus. Can you just give me an idea of what rebound is, how it affects my ride, and what I should be looking for?
Okay, so the rebound, or the term rebound, is basically the extension of the fork, so it's rebounding. What we're talking about is rebound damping, so you'll hear the term damping quite a lot, and it's basically to do with controlling the speed at which the fork rebounds, so it actually comes from into the travel to the top. So the rebound is basically dampening the vibration, or sorry, the compression of the spring and your body mass, and controlling the weight of the wheel as well, actually, which is another quite interesting thing.
So that explanation might explain why I get the plus and the minus mixed up.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually controlling the rate of dampening, not the rate of rebound itself.
So people think when they go to the plus or they go to the tortoise, they go to the tortoise, that they're basically going to make the tortoise and jackalope thing's a little bit more intuitive for a customer, because they can think tortoise, well, that's quick, and slow, and jackalope, that's quick. So the plus and the minus thing, we get a lot of the time people going, oh, I'm turning it to plus, but it's just kind of going really slow. It's okay, so you're increasing rebound damping, not increasing the speed of the fork necessarily. So
and that's where the confusion can strike. So if you're running a plus-minus system, a plus-minus gauge on your fork, depending on the brand you're using, plus actually slows it down and minus actually speeds it up.
Or righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. If you're going clockwise, you're making it slower, and if you're going anti-clockwise, you're making it quicker.
So same with my bolts and things on the rest of my bike.
Yeah.
Great, okay. Well, thank you for that overview. So that's the fundamentals of forks explained very clearly. Thank you very much. And I've certainly learned a little bit more than I did, which was very little to start with. So, essentially keep it nice and simple. Get the air in the shot, check out how much it's compressing. Use your guides here. If you're blowing out all the time, or if you're not using enough, adjust your air. And don't be afraid of the simple tasks. The lower leg removal, online guides from all your manufacturers, a few simple tools by the sounds of things. Set yourself up with the right equipment before you start, so maybe read that tutorial before you actually undertake, and away we can go and get more travel, more performance out of whatever plushness we can find in our fork, and make our money go a little bit further.